Hello, everybody. This video comes with something, well, a lot of a proviso regarding any assumptions, outcomes, or conclusions made from it. This is merely discourse and conjecture based on lots of people contacting me about the esoteric, occultic aspects of Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset. There's a lot of speculation on the internet, and alt media is unfortunately full of disinformation. A lot of it is not purposeful disinformation, it's just incorrect information that originally came from two sources. The first one is the 1970s Christian identity pamphlets and radio broadcasts that were popular in America, particularly in the Deep South, and were distributed through groups like the Ku Klux Klan, Posse Comitatus, and racist biker gangs, people like the Shamrock Crew and groups like that. And it's based on a kind of a extreme Presbyterian biblical misunderstanding. And that's unfortunately has become very much the basis for many things that are taken as fact when dealing with the esoteric within the alternative media. The other side is theosophy. There's quite a lot of theosophists in alt media who have brought in this, it's really basically lobbying on behalf of theosophy. Now, there's nothing particularly wrong with theosophy at all. I don't have a problem with it or anything like that. It's just that they're still coming from their own dogmatic viewpoint. You can tell these people, easy enough, they will talk about things like, they will use phrases like, they'll describe Helena Blavatsky as Madame Blavatsky, and they'll big up things like the secret doctrine and so on. This is just basically straight out of their theosophy background. And again, there's nothing, essentially wrong with this, but they're still preaching. They're still preaching as they hold the likes of Helena Blavatsky up in the same way Catholics do St. Augustine. It's just how it is. And a lot of it is not disinformation in the sense that it's wrong or it's lies. It's just coming from a particular narrative. So always remember that. The majority of the occult decoding breakdowns you get in alt media ultimately comes from two sources. The Christian identity movement in America in the 1960s and 70s, and also the Theosophical Society. Again, they are what they are, and you can take them any way you want. There is a middle path, though, and the middle path is looking at the occultic nature of things happening in the world, particularly from a Freemasonic point of view, because at the end of the day, if these people are members of any occultic societies, it's always going to be, nearly always, Freemasonry, whether it's Scottish Rite, the Grand Lodge of Ireland, Apollo Lodge, the York Lodge, the Scandinavian Lodge, and the Germanic Rite. It's nearly always goes back to that. And these people, if you want to understand the occult now of what you call the globalists, the elite, you've really got to delve into Freemasonry. And I think this is very applicable to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and particularly the Great Reset. I have seen pictures of Klaus Schwab in clearly Masonic robes, getting doctorates from universities. And in Central Europe, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, membership, and in Scandinavia as well, membership of Masonic lodges is basically a given. And so if there's any occultic aspect to this, it's definitely rooted in that, because the actual occult of the power system is not Satanism. It's not Luciferianism, although Luciferianism is a strong aspect within both Theosophy and Masonry. It's Masonry. It's not like the worship of the devil or anything like that. This is all the Christian assumptions. Again, it comes from a kind of a dichotomy, a schism that happened between the Posse Comitatus, Christian identity, occultic investigators of the 70s and confronting the lodges. And so it's interesting how they're both kind of dependent on one another. And yet the funny thing is, so is this Lord, and I'm going to be kind of breaking down for you. The whole aspect of as above, so below, the Hermetic maxim, very much applies here. So diving into the world of Freemasonry, there's not a lot out there. I'm not a Freemason. I have been clear in the past that I've been asked to join Masonic lodges here in Ireland and one in Norway. And I didn't join because I'm not a club joiner, although I did have access to their libraries, and I do have quite a collection of books. So going by that, now most of the books, if any of us have ever come across a Masonic Bible, it's sort of like a good introduction to what I'm talking about today. And also it's a good introduction to the Masonic aspects of their own occultic destiny. Now, it's usually the King James Bible, pretty much verbatim, and at the very back there is lots of Egyptology and Egyptian ancient mystery religion type texts. So very much big time, with a smattering of a very small smattering of like Hellenic paganism. Majority of their work is definitely rooted in a fusion of this King James Bible coupled with the incorporation of the ancient Egyptian religion of Pharaonic Egypt. Now, what I'm talking about here in terms of these archetypes actually would probably go far back and much deeper in time. Definitely back to an Indo-European aspect, but also Hittite as well. There's a lot of the Hittite religion has survived through things like Masonry. Now, and things such as the kind of a way we approach the ancient Egyptian religion. Now, I know that in the field of etymology in relation to the occult, there's often a notion that certain words can mean certain things that are different than what they are. So, like, and that's definitely true. That's definitely right out of the lodge. Information. You get your information to be information. That's one of the most famous ones, but there's lots of them. And understanding. This is why the court systems are so heavily dependent on Masonic thought and Masonic culture. Do you understand? Do you stand underneath me? That's absolutely true. That's not nonsense. That's actually real. And it's just the funny handshakes and not as good as a wink to a blind man, and all this kind of like palava lingo that the lodges use. So yes, it's absolutely true that they do take words and they do play with them. In fact, they seem to enjoy it very much. It's like a game to them. But it's also part of their belief that there's the creator, which they don't actually mention who the creator is, but they do, even though they do venerate certain deities and the Almighty God, the creator, but they don't specify what God it is. And they also venerate Lucifer, but Lucifer is not a creator. Lucifer within Masonry is the esoteric Lucifer, which is sort of seen as a kind of a catalytic force to cause changes both in consciousness and within the material world. So I'm going to be hitting you with a lot of information here, and it is a huge subject. What this video is about is, I'm not saying this is 100% true, but using a kind of a deductive language and a sort of a forensic analysis of Masonry in relationship to globalization, that I'm putting this idea forward. You guys are welcome to run with it any way you want. This is not a religious sermon. This is a breakdown of things in terms of a discussion going forward. And in fact, a lot of my work is like that. While I say that, I want to let you know that the actual source material is correct. So the deductions have the question mark, but not the source material. This is not research. This is actual fact, okay? Which is very rare. People, his research and her research, their research, this research. The research is really speculation. It's the conclusions are the research, but the actual facts of the source material is not research. It's just what it is, okay? It's just written down as it is. And you can take that any way you want. I take most of it as legit because it's come through very long stages. And although much of it is archetypal, a lot of it is also very relevant to how the history of the world has developed. Now, if we look at the word, the Great Reset, we see that the second part of the reset is the set, S-E-T. Now, both set the Egyptian deity, and Seth, S-E-T-H, of the Bible are very, very important in Masonry, extremely important. And I'll explain to you why. But this is a classic example of how they fused the ancient Egyptian religion with King James Presbyterian Christianity. Remember, King James Presbyterian religion was created so it would give people an immediate access to the Bible in their own native language, and they could study it in the same rabbinical sense that Orthodox Jews do, and analyze and talk about scriptures. So it was very much, the Presbyterian, like the likes of the Calvinists, the Lutherans, and the King James Bible, was very much about taking this Hebrew text and saying, here it is in your own language, make of it what you will. Now, there was translation errors both in German, French, and English when these Presbyterian Bibles were written, and that's caused a lot of confusion down the road regarding things, especially such as Lucifer. But other than that, this is what the purpose of the Reformation was, to make the actual biblical scriptures, the rabbinical text, more accessible to the average European, whatever that was meant by that. So therefore, by fusing the Egyptian aspects of the word Seth with the Christian, biblical, Jewish word Seth, S-E-T-H, we're kind of getting insight into the underlying software that's below all this. Now, when I say underlying software, I'm talking about the consciousness trajectory that drives these people. We do know they have an apocalyptic mindset. We do know they have a desire for a great cleansing of humanity. And we do know that they have a great affinity for the book of Genesis, and in particular, the parts about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Because it's the oldest tradition, and a lot of Judaism comes from it to an extent, I'll start with S-E-T, the Egyptian deity first. Now, Seth is the god of the desert and foreign incursions. This is very interesting now. It's a self-destructive aspect to his thing. He's what we consider darkness is not the same thing that an Abrahamic considers darkness. I mean, I'm talking about the pagans, and the ancient Egyptians were the same. It's like the Lovecraftian gods. Seth was a necessary balancing force within creation. One cannot exist without the other, light and dark. That play of light and shadow was a spiritual thing as well. And Seth represented the other side of what Horus represented. He was also the lord of the desert and the lord of the red land. Now that's he's heavily associated with the color red, Seth. He's also associated with Mercury, the planet Mercury, and we know what Mercury is a primary ingredient in. I have to watch my language here. And he's also heavily zoomorphized in that he can appear as a number of animals in his earthly form. Otherwise, he's a force of energy. But his association with foreigners is interesting in that he is the god of the foreigners coming in from other countries. But the thing is, the irony of this is that the foreigners always reject Seth. So he can't win. Now, there's a constant conflict that happens within the Egyptian religion between Horus and Seth. Now, Horus is the other side of he's sort of like, if you were to say, the god of light. Not a Luciferian god of light, but the light of the subconscious mind, which is the esoteric Lucifer. Now, Seth and Horus basically battle it out for the creation of reality. And the conflict is always resolved in the same way. It's Horus loses an eye and Seth loses his testicles. He's neutered. So this was probably what the castration cults of the Middle East came from. Now, it doesn't take two and two or to be a genius to see that the castration cult is very prominent in the world today. and the way it's actively pushed by the media, and even now laws are being passed where you have to, if someone castrates themselves, you have to say they're the opposite gender. So it's the inversion cult. And then there's also the psychic castration, where the men don't have the strength to fight anymore. Seth's and Horus's conflict is often about losing their balls, and to use that metaphor, and the men succumbing to fear and darkness. And very important to that the castration aspect of it. Now, that's the Seth cult. The Seth cult is very interesting in that the ancient Greeks spelt it with the H, the same way that the Christians do, the Abrahamics do. Now, Seth, we're going to move to the biblical Seth. Seth was the third son of Adam and Eve. And you know that whole thing of that meme that was going around, the atheist shares, like Adam and Eve had two sons and they both died. Take as long as you need to think about that one, meaning that there could be no further human beings. No, in the actual rabbinical text, and this is one of the reasons why Presbyterianism came about, Catholics were never told about Seth or Lilith. And the Protestants decided to make the Bible translatable into their national languages in order for people to discover these things. Now, Seth, being the third son of Adam and Eve, his family line became what Noah would become. So Noah, he's an ancestor of Noah, of the great deluge and the biblical flood. So when the deluge happened and the great flood happened, it was the only part of the bloodline of Adam and Eve that survived was the Seth bloodline. All the others were wiped out. So you had the other bloodlines were wiped out. They were annihilated. So according to rabbinical texts, we are all descendants of Seth, S-E-T-H, not of Adam and Eve. And that was another issue too that's been theologists have often mulled over, is how could we be responsible for the original sin, or even the prodigal son aspects of Cain and Abel, when we're descendants of a third branch of that family. And that family that committed the original sin doesn't exist anymore. Now, this brings us to what is original sin, okay? Original sin, according to the Masons, is the apple that represented Lucifer, the Enlightenment, the Annilusius of James Ussher's biblical timeline. The 5 seeds in a row inside the apple represents the pentagram, which is the orbital nature of Venus around the planet Earth. It forms a pentagram in the sky. Look it up if you don't believe me. And so this has been known for a long time. And this is why the pentagram became synonymous with both neo-paganism and with the anti-Christian religions, including Judaism, by the way. Within the texts concerning Seth, he was seen as a great man. He was a great man. He not only is the father of the Kabbalah, but he's also a great scientist, mathematician, and engineer. He's a great sort of work deity. Well, he's not a deity; he's immortal. But he's almost like he represents that kind of Indo-European archetype of the smithy god. But he's not a god; he's a man because of it's Judaism. Now, the fall from grace has been interpreted as mankind developing free will and moving away from free association. And with this free will came all kinds of things, like we could create, design. We didn't need God in the Garden of Eden anymore because we could learn agriculture. Now, some people have said that the fall from grace is man, discoveries of agriculture. Therefore, they didn't need God anymore to provide them food in the garden. But others believe, and I think this is absolutely very crucial to this, is that the fall from grace was when man discovered fire. Because when man discovered fire, he was able to exist in the darkness. He was able to go into the Mistophilistic aspects of the reality. Therefore, you can see this was beautifully portrayed in the opening sequences of 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. The fire gave advantage. So the fire allowed man to go into the darkness to battle the Set, to battle Mephistopheles, to transcend the demarcations and limitations placed upon them by the Tetragrammaton, the unknown name of God. And therefore, mankind had fallen from grace because, in a Promethean sense, they had stolen the fire from the gods. This would be the Hellenic aspects of Masonry, the Promethean aspects, taking the fire from the gods. And what is the great maxim of the Masons? To gather up that which is scattered and to reassemble it into something new. So the creation of fire was two sticks rubbed together, a flint against two pieces of flint, the creation of gathered up things to turn it into fire. And fire allowed man to go into the caves, into the night, into the darkness, and therefore out of the light of God. Accompanying factor of mankind ever since that moment. Fire brought us from the fear of the night predator and the fear of the night and brought us into the darkest caves. In fact, they brought us into Plato's cave. Think about that one. You Neoplatonists find that interesting too. But we've now reached an age where fire, meaning the processing of hydrocarbons in order to make ignition and combustion, that has served us so well all through our history, with the creation, and then also the Industrial Revolution, that world is now over. That world is now over. And the hydrocarbon fire of an unknown origin is gone. And, there's also other aspects here to the djinn of smokeless fire, fire of unknown origin, and so on. Oh, by the way, speaking of fire of unknown origin, the Blue Oyster Cult, the band, there was a song of that title. The process church of the Final Judgment was also one of those factors in the early days of the growth of popularizing occultic mysteries in the 60s and 70s. So we reached an age now where the end of Horus, the age of Horus is ending and the age of Seth is beginning. Now, those of you Telemites out there are immediately jumping up, and it's not the first time. About 8 years ago, I wrote an essay claiming that it's quite possible that Crowley's age of Horus, Aeon of Horus, has ended prematurely because of two factors. One, the growth, the resurgence of paganism, which kind of makes Crowleyanity obsolete because it takes the dichotomy of Crowleyanity's apostate blasphemies against Christianity out of the equation, because paganism has no, well, Wicca does, but real paganism has no connection to Christianity. And secondly, the growth of technology, in particular the internet, created a third level of consciousness. Now, this is also being a big debate within Hinduism at the moment, where within Hinduism, there's now a belief that the Kali Yuga, rather than happening thousands of years in the future, for the same reason, because of the change in technology, is probably happening now. And then you have within the Irish mythological pantheon, the Babe's prophecy. You read that and you're struck by how it's the world that we live in today. Fields without produce, Bill Gates and his great resets people taking the farms away. The seas without fish. We're not allowed to fish anymore because we're told the fish stocks have depleted. Men will go to beds with their sons, and mothers will go to bed with their daughters, and no man will take a lover outside his own home. You can see you can put those ones together. That's the Babe's prophecy 3,500 years ago from Irish mythology. And so this battle between Seth and Horus is coming to a conclusion with the castration cults and Horus now being defeated, losing his one eye. And I've noticed that the all-seeing eye of the eye of providence in Masonry has lost its prominence in recent time, but also it had that flare up in the media. And by the way, this stuff here that people do and all that stuff, the celebrities, that's nothing to do with the eye of Horus or the devil or Satanism or 666. What that is it comes from European folk magic. It's called patriopathic magic, and it just means to ward off evil. Our ancestors have long believed that the covering of one eye wards off evil. And you know what happened to Horus? He lost an eye. So I mean, these things go back very, very deep into our ancient past. So is the Great Reset the Great Reset? SETH. I don't know, but considering all the factors regarding that mythology and how it stands, it would not surprise me if they're now ending the age of fire, with the age of fire and the age of combustion, the hydrocarbon as the fuel, and moving into new forms of energy, which they don't quite know yet. It's almost like they're not able to produce the technology to power the earth right now, but they've almost left it in the fate of the gods, as if they're waiting for another Lucifer. Lucifer is also connected to fire because he is the fire in the mind of men within the Masonic thought. And also Lucifer is heavily involved in combustion. He's derived from the god phosphor, the Greek god phosphor. And a friction match was used to be called a Lucifer because it created what? It created fire. So it's almost like now people within the alternative scene seem to have an obsession with Lucifer. But if anything, the elites, the occultic elites, either overtly or subconsciously are putting Lucifer to sleep to produce a new kind of fire, a fire that's smokeless. Now, this was kind of worrying to me because the smokeless fire represents the Islamic concept of the jinn. We have had several Gulf Wars, and we've had a massive transmigration of jinns from the east to the west by servicemen bringing them and women bringing the stuff home with them. So ultimately, are we dealing with some kind of jinn infection, especially with the corrosionic nature of the internet, in particular social media? I don't know. All I'm saying is that if you want to apply an occultic aspect to the Great Reset, and knowing how these guys operate, and knowing that fundamentally they all go back to their lodges, I'm presenting this here now as an occultic possible decoding key lexicon into what's going on in their minds. But I have no doubt, and mark well, this is true, that a huge esoteric occultic element is behind their Great Reset. And it could be Set and it could be Seth. But either way, it's probably both. And it's probably been designed in the lodges. And it's also happening as a matter of happenstance and circumstance too. And these people are riding it out just as much as the rest of us. And again, as a pagan, I feel that I am best equipped, and I'm not postulizing, that I am best equipped to deal with this because my spiritual beliefs are outside anything that's contained within a Masonic Bible. Thank you very much, and the conversation continues.